Hello, this is Possibility Wave, and we're about to start segment number 3 of part 4. The series is entitled Signal Encoding Theory and Biofeedback. As you're probably well aware, there are 4 parts. This is part 4. Part 4 is divided into 5 segments. This is segment number 3 of 5. As before, this is Garnet Dupuis. I'm your presenter, co-founder and creative designer of Possibility Wave, I'm proud to say. Connect with us, possibilitywave.com, possibilitywave.com. If you're following this at all, you're aware that there are 4 parts. You can see them here on screen. We're focusing now on part number 4. Each of the parts has a particular theme. The theme of part 4 is the use of pure information in the encoding of signals, the information encoding process. Let's begin. This is, of course, a direct continuation from segment number 1 and segment number 2. If you've not had a chance to experience those, I would definitely recommend that you do. All the 4 parts are developed to be experienced in sequence optimally, and certainly within part 4, the 5 segments are really best experienced one after the other. Okay, here we are continuing along the theme. We've explored a number of key factors that help us build an appreciation and understanding and a point of view as to what information is more clearly, I hope, maybe what information is not, as well as a number of different components of a concept that we build step by step. My thought now in this section, which will be a larger segment, and one that has really significant, somewhat elusive, at least elusive in the beginning, principles. But these principles are really at the heart of the whole issue. What I thought is we could look at some examples of pure information encoding, but look in uses that are not typical to biofeedback. Because of course biofeedback is a particular approach, a methodology, a technology, whereby information is circulated in feedback loops. There are plenty of examples in human culture, human history, where information codes are used in areas that are not biofeedback. I think by seeing them this way, it'll be much easier for us to appreciate them in relation to biofeedback. Let's begin. 4 basic requirements in pure information encoding. What do we require, regardless of the type or the use or the culture or even what point in history, I suppose? Number 1 is we have to have the participation of consciousness, conscious participation. It's not an act that can be done in a mindless way. Certainly it must be a mindful way. And the more that this is appreciated, the better the result. Secondly is we need access to the information. And since we're working in the realm of consciousness, there are particular ways that we can proceed in accessing the information, and one of these main ways is through symbols. We're going to spend a good chunk of time focusing on the whole phenomena, the very dramatic, dynamic reality of symbols. The third thing is the basic faith field. A conscious participation, but without the construct of the basic faith field, is just way too diffuse. Way too diffuse. And then the fourth thing is certainly a methodology. And in certain cases, and sometimes we definitely would involve what we could call ritual or ceremony or a very structured methodology. If you happen to be looking on screen, you'll see two rather dramatic photos. One you can see on the left, a great number of monks in the process of a ritual ceremony creating pure information codes. And then the other, you see the rather scary marching of a group of soldiers with weapons. And to understand that information coding, pure information coding, can be utilized in all sorts of ways. Obviously, the positive ones are the most attractive to me, to us. But it's still something that is a big factor in human society. Let's have a look. Choosing examples. What kind of examples could we put together so that we could explore this as a learning experience? And as you know, my first choice here is to choose examples that are not in biofeedback. So here my choices, they're limited, absolutely. What are they limited by? Well, my own experiences, what I understand, what I've encountered, what I've studied, what I've experienced, and also the context of this presentation, trying to bring it together so that when you encounter this, it makes sense, that you can, it clarifies and builds upon itself. And when we're looking at examples, what we have to recognize is the aim. The aim, by using a whole cluster of examples, is to make more evident the primary principles that you find in these examples. What's common in all of them? Don't get lost in the variations. Try to string all of these together by recognizing, identifying the primary principles that link them all, that allow them to be in one big category. So please keep that in mind. That's what we're looking at here. Some examples you may resonate with more, some less. Regardless of the example, let's see if we can't detect primary principles. That's our aim. Okay, my first is what do you call it? The development of a principle called Tantra. Tantra is a Sanskrit word. It's actually the conjoining of two words, tanoti and trayoti. Literally expands and liberates. The best appreciation I have of what Tantra is captured in the word continuum. Tantra recognizes that all experience is in a unified continuum, that it's not fragmented, that it's not in sections that are separated one from the other, and then you have to try somehow to create bridges or links or something like that. It's one sweeping continuum. Tantra is continuum. Here is a little bit of an elaborate definition. I'll read it right off the slide. You can do it with me if you like. Tantra is the belief and practices which, working from the principle that the universe we experience is nothing other than the manifestation of the awareness that creates and maintains that universe. And Tantra seeks to ritually appropriate and channel that awareness within the human microcosm. So, okay, a little bit wordy, but if you look into it, and there's that word principle, because I said we're looking to recognize common principles. What's the principle? Well, it's based on a principle that the universe we experience is nothing other than the manifestation of the awareness that creates and maintains that universe. So that's exactly in line with the possibility wave view. We say, as our fundamental belief, our axiom, that awareness is the fundamental and primary matrix of all of reality. So this is consistent with the point of view from Tantra. And of course, you know, Tantra comes out of the Hindu culture and was absorbed and amalgamated with Buddhism into Vajrayana Buddhism, you know, recognized usually as Tibetan Buddhism. But these ideas, this approach, is also found in other cultures, other developments. You know, there's a great deal to be said about the similarities, for example, in many aspects of Taoism. Let's continue on, because, you know, seeing Tantra as a zone of example for principles may be either, you know, interesting or refreshing or shocking or confusing to you. So let's continue. The first thing, and this has to be cleared up because, I don't know, it's just this weird thing. Our cultures become so saturated and infatuated with sexuality, and that there's this sensational and absurd idea that Tantra is all about sex. And that's just straight ignorance. It's such a distortion of a really profound tradition and appreciation. The principle of Tantra is that all of life is a manifestation of awareness, and that's consistent with the possibility wave view. All of life is a manifestation of awareness. So consequently, all of life can be engaged in the refinement of awareness. That there's nothing out of bounds, there's nothing, you know, the way that in a lot of Judeo-Christian thought, the way that there's been this horrible separation between, you know, what's called like the soul and the body, or the spirit and the body is seen as either a punishment or a terrible source of temptation, and you know, flagellants with horsehair robes. All of these things are not found in the Tantra view. The Tantra view is that all of life is a manifestation of awareness, and consequently all of life can be engaged in the refinement of awareness. You know, the sexual aspect of life contributes a very small portion of classical Tantra. There's a lot of symbology, we'll get more into that, but in most cases, you know, sexual acts have no involvement in lifelong tantric practices. You know, I don't know, frustrated, for example, even just going to the internet and punching in, you know, Tantra or Tantric, and up pops, you know, just reams of all these sexual photos and so on. It's a shame. Anyway, I have to clear that up because for some people, when they see Tantra, it triggers this inappropriate association, and it's just disappointing and not correct to go there. Okay, having said that, let's continue. So what's with the number one factor? Okay, let's look. The principal factors in tantric practices are really two things that overlap. One is that we have the ability to think creative thoughts. This is an extraordinary capacity that we have. Recognizing this innate capacity, Tantra decides to use this as benefit. This is a very perceptive appreciation of an efficient use of an innate tendency. Instead of thinking that all thoughts are bad, or that thinking is bad, this silly oversimplification of spiritual practice or meditation, in Tantra they recognize that because we have the capacity for creative thought, let's make use of that. Combined with this as a principal factor, the second one is the understanding that it's possible to access reality in total via the appearances in our experience. Again, some traditions totally condemn appearances. And Tantra says, no, you don't quite understand that because awareness is the fundamental factor, the fundamental nature of reality. Even appearances are still infused with awareness. And depending on the modulated state of consciousness, your experience, the association, what happens as you experience these appearances can be very, very different depending on your point of view. So these are the two things. If you want to think about Tantra, one is the efficient use of our innate capacity to think creative thoughts. And the other is the understanding that it's possible to access a more absolute reality via the more relative appearances of reality. So creative thoughts and appearances. Along with all the aspects of sense and non-sense, as I say here, that's a funny double meaning, all aspects of sense and non-sense experience, the ability of imagination is above all else. Now, to make a clear distinction, imaginary, and these are all words, so don't get tripped up over the words, but let's say there's this thing called imaginary, that it's really not real. But there is this thing called imagination, which is creative thought. So don't think, well, you're just going to fool yourself by living in this imaginary world. No. That's a slide out the side door. That's not the point here. The point is we have a capacity to think creative thoughts and to engage that in a constructive way. To use our creative thought, what we could call our imagination, can have a very, very, very positive outcome. This is some of the preciousness that's been recognized in the tantric traditions. Okay, let's keep going. This issue of Tantra and certain essential appreciations. Okay, in Tantra, it's recognized that the mind is capable of experiencing many, many, many states of consciousness as modulations of awareness. We've talked about this a great deal in previous segments as well as in part number 1 and part number 2. It's a big flowing, constant message. But broadly speaking, and to make it more simple, we can divide the states of consciousness, the modulations of awareness, into two big groups, two big categories, two basic categories. One we can call stillness, the other we can call movement, stillness and movement. So when you experience the mind, your mind, the mind, one mind, when you experience that aspect of yourself, what you'll notice is that by degree, it can be more in the realm of stillness, decreased thought, lack of thought, more pacific, tranquil emotion. Or it can be in the realm of movement, where there are numerous thoughts or types of thoughts and varied emotions of different degrees and color. So stillness and movement, these are two basic categories. And it must be said, contrary to many common ideas, the movement aspect of the conscious mind is not negative. It's an unfortunate oversimplification to think that the only way that mind can be a friend, the only way you can be yourself, is to be completely absorbed increasingly in greater and greater degrees of stillness. No, the stillness alone is very overrated. Both stillness and movement are basic states of the conscious mind. It's a little bit like inhale, exhale, or yin and yang. So with this, we start to get a different sort of attitude towards what's generally called tantric practices, how they work with consciousness, how they work with the basic faith field, how they work with symbols, how they work with methodologies, starts to become really attractive. They've got something there. The thing that I really value, that I respect about Tantra is they had, over time, and this, practitioner after practitioner, after, as the whole tradition built, they did an awful lot to not reject. Many traditions reject. And you can have the real renunciates that really have a rule set. They're into avoidance. Or you can have, the purification processes where you're always trying to counter the negative with a positive. You're playing this game on like a scale of one side and the other. And in Tantra, they say, wait a minute, we can work an awful lot with the transformative aspect of all of this if we can accept that it's all in the continuum of experience, that it's, our nature. We have these characteristics. Now you can have a virtuous application of the characteristic, or you can have a vicious application of the characteristic. But the characteristic is innate. And one of the innate characteristics for us as humans is this ability to generate creative thought and to not be too attracted or too averse to appearances, that we can work with appearances with the proper attitude. Appearances meaning all of the subjective experiences that we have. So here, what I call the moving mind is also the creative mind. The movement aspect of consciousness can creatively interface with information, energy, matter, and space. This creative interaction is called imagination. Imagine that. Imagination allows exploration that can lead to discovery. And here on the screen, one of the more funny, even provocative images of Einstein sticking his tongue, but one of his, I guess, popular quotes was that imagination is more important than knowledge. Imagination. So here we are with something that is possible if we can appreciate its nature. And that possibility opens very wide when we start to recognize the potential of using creative thought, using imagination, to create certain states, and to recognize that appearance can also be a superb vehicle, path for the process. Stillness and movement. So what we have here is the fact that Tantra, this is a little bit of a definition, is the creative use of the moving mind in combination with the still mind. So because you're working with creative imagination doesn't mean that you forego spending time dwelling deeper and deeper in the stillness aspect. They're both the mind. It's who we are. It's who we are. Even that yin-yang symbol, it's so profound, where you could think of the dark as the still mind and the light as the moving mind, but in each you see the seed of the other, and of course the symbol works to create the sense of movement. It's always, one thing is always evolving into the next. The yin is evolving into the yang and the yin, and so on. So here, Tantra is the creative use of the moving mind in combination with the still mind. And keep in mind, what we're doing here is we're doing our best to explore examples of pure information processes, developing information codes that are not necessarily for use in biofeedback processes. But whether you use it in biofeedback processes or not, in a sense, is kind of irrelevant. What's important is that First of all, you recognize what a pure information process is all about, and then use that to create information codes, remembering that there are basically two ways to create information codes: applied energy and pure information. This is all about the second one, the pure information. And here, what you do is you use the faith field, the basic faith field, you construct that, and use it as an amplifier, so that as an amplifier it fortifies this creative interaction with the information field, with the I field. Get a perspective on the nature of mind, the still and moving nature, the benefit of the creative aspect of imagination and working with appearances. Setting this up, then begin to build your faith field. And as you enter into the process, you're going to recognize that there are a number of techniques or methodologies that you can utilize, and that very frequently in pure information processes, the use of symbols is critical. So the whole issue of information encoding. In Tantra, consciousness is the prime mover. It unifies information, and consequently it unifies all of energy, matter, and space. It's exactly the same possibility wave principle or axiom that I've been sort of hounding and pounding on all along. In the pure information process, you identify the faith field, you identify the information by the constructs of the faith field. You set that up, and the information begins to come forward. And then what you do is you encode this, typically in applications that can involve certain practices and rituals. And then to store it as a code, you can then engage symbols, you can create the morphogenic fields, you can even imprint it in a substantial matter or a medium of some sort. You're going to see as we go along in exploring this, how this fulfills the concept of the example and what kind of principles are derived from this. It's not the only one we're going to explore, but this is quite a rich domain for the identification of these principles. There it is, there's that yin-yang symbol, right? And what I'd like to do now is challenging, and I'll do my very best. What I'm aiming for is the recognition that symbol is so much more than generally what we think. That symbol is really, it's a state of mind. And it's really impossible to explore pure information encoding, and even Tantra, but it's impossible to explore pure information encoding without encountering the profound importance of symbol. Symbol. What's a symbol? Symbol is a direct, visible manifestation of invisible consciousness. Symbol is the visible aspect of an invisible state of mind. It's a visible modulation of awareness. Symbol is, we're going to keep going here. If you begin to appreciate more and more, with greater clarity, what a symbol is all about, it's going to be much, much, much easier to understand pure information encoding as a process, and inevitably even the potency of an information code. Here's a definition, and I would really encourage you to spend time contemplating this and the implications of the definition. A symbol is the entanglement of meaning, memory, motion, and matter. Entanglement is a term here, of course, borrowed from quantum mechanics. The idea that when two particles interrelate, afterwards, when apparently separated, they remain in a unified experience. I won't even say connection. They can be quite far apart, apparently, but when you do something to one, it happens to the other. Entanglement is one of the strangest, most wonderful emergent features that has come forward in quantum mechanics. So here I'm using that term purposefully. A symbol is the entanglement of meaning, memory, motion, and matter. I spend time with that, please. You can think of symbol as an encrypted code of the information. We talked about encrypting, right? That's the storage aspect. Identify, encode, and store, and that the storing involves typically an encryption process so that you're able to capture all of the data that's encoded in this final product. And the symbol, a symbol, is a very, very, very efficient way of doing it. Once you have the information in code encrypted as a symbol, that you can use that symbol repeatedly in all sorts of ways. So think of symbol as an encrypted code of the information. It's an information code. At this point, I think it's safe to drop the term Tantra and just reflect more back onto the principles: still mind, moving mind, creative imagination, appearance, faith field. These things are found everywhere throughout human societies. It's not as though it's limited to the few cultural developments in tantric principles. I think you can just drop the word Tantra and rely on consciousness, faith field, and symbol to recognize the dynamic. I think, and I hope at least, that these principles are coming out and that the context of Tantra becomes less interesting and these principles become more interesting. Consciousness, faith field, and symbol. There are people that say, well, all of creation is one big symbol. Symbol of what? Well, symbol of the modulations of awareness, symbol of the innate nature, the essential fundamentals, the matrix of reality, awareness. A lot of that comes up in the idea that your entire experience, the entire range of sensorium and imagination is one perfect mandala, exquisitely and perfectly suited for your learning. Mandala as a symbol here becomes quite electrifying. There are a lot of folks that say for human beings, for us, for the you and me that are listening to this, I don't know who else is, they say that for the human being, the human body is the ultimate symbol. And some say even more than the human body, that the face, the human face, is the most provocative, the most profound and stimulating representative of being alive for a human being, the human face, symbol. All spoken languages are forms of symbol. We'll look more at that. If you want to have a head scratcher, even the word symbol is a symbol of, well, what's the word symbol a symbol of? I can't quite get there. If you can come up with an answer, I'd love to know. Let's be clear that symbols are not just visuals. The symbol is not limited to a visual pattern and color at all. Symbol can be, audio. It can be sound, the spoken word, chanting, or music. It goes on and on. A symbol, when you start to have a much better sense, that's the entanglement of meaning, memory, motion, and matter. Wow. Symbol can also be movement, dance, ritual performance. Here you're taking the human body, which some people claim to be the ultimate symbol for the human being, and I'm looking now at this image in the right corner of the ballerina doing that incredible jump. What looking at that provokes in me is really important. Wow. So, and symbol can appear in forms and shapes of matter. I'm thinking right now of like the Northwest and Aboriginals in North America. The totem pole, totems, and everything that it meant for them as symbols. So what we're going to do now is look more closely at symbol and recognize that there are basically two kinds of symbols. This segment number 3, is going to spend time in natural symbols, and then segment number 4 is going to shift over to assigned symbols. To give you an idea, we're around 35 minutes or so into the presentation. This is probably going to go about an hour, I'm guessing. Let's see. Natural symbols and assigned symbols. If you're looking at the screen, you see along the top, you would recognize those as symbols of the display of energy and information at each of the 7 major chakras in the human being. Those are natural symbols. We'll define that more. And then below that, in a very interesting signature, that's Abraham Lincoln, A. Lincoln. This is an example of an assigned symbol. Natural symbols. These are direct information expressions of various states of consciousness, energy, matter, and space. Natural symbols are self-created. They are what they are because of what they are, the state. And any encounter with a natural symbol, and again, try to catch what I'm saying here, that any encounter with a natural symbol is a direct encounter with the original source of that symbol. It's not separate. It's not just a symbol. When you encounter it in the state of consciousness, because this is all reliant on consciousness. If you pull consciousness out of this equation, it falls down flat. The air goes out of the balloon. Awareness and all the modulations of awareness as consciousness is really at the core of pure information processes. Here, recognize that an encounter with a natural symbol is a direct encounter with the original source of that symbol. In a sense, the source and the symbol are never separated. That's why I say it's an entanglement. There may be the appearance of separateness, but they're entangled. The meaning, the memory, the motion, and the matter are entangled so that when something happens to one, it happens to the other. It's impossible to break them apart, even if by appearance they could seem to be apart. Natural symbols emerge throughout creation as information codes. They are the information code. They have completed the process of identification, encoding, and storage. It's all 3 have happened. Wow. They are unified consciousness, information, energy, matter, and space, all nested in the matrix of awareness. Here you see, it's quite a common symbol these days, but analyzing it and recognizing the purity of its mathematics is part of the shocking nature of it. it's not really a symbol of something. It is that expressing it in the symbol form, but it's not separate. It's entangled. Wow. You know, you can also tease out natural symbols into an expression using different kinds of technology. If you're looking up at the screen now, you'll see two different images. On the left, this came out from, you know, some time ago. There was a musician with a bright and curious mind, Ernst Chladni, and he had a violin. Well, I probably had more than one, but using a violin, he would put sand particles on the wooden frame and produce certain notes, and was fascinated by the fact that different notes created different geometric patterns quite reliably. The next one over, one of the black background, comes out of somatics. Hans Jenny out of Switzerland began to do this, and others have taken it up. Wow, it's some of the most exciting, delightful, mesmerizing stuff that you can imagine. You would get different kinds of speaker diaphragms and sometimes put frames on, sometimes not, and then cover it with different kinds of fine particles, lycopodium powder, like a very fine moss powder, or sometimes sand or different things, and would play different electronic sounds in highly specific frequencies, and notice how the frequencies would create these magnificent displays, and repeatedly. And as soon as the frequency changes, the image changes. Here you can see these are natural symbols. These are musical notes. He didn't do like weird stuff to the technology to get the patterns. It was pretty straight ahead. And here you see, you know, depending on the octave, you know, A, B, C, D flat, sharp. You can see that the musical note is this. This isn't the representation of the note. This is the visual note. This symbol is the note, is the sound, is the frequency. Any encounter with any one of these is an encounter with the original frequency of the note, the sound. Well, here are natural symbols through the cymatic approach. And more and more is being done. There's a good deal of this on the internet. If you search around into YouTube, you'll see. We glanced at this earlier in the introduction, but here are, you know, for a good number of people now, you know, quite well-known and even famous natural symbols through yogic experience. These different symbols came to be recognized as the representations and the expressions energetically in consciousness of the different chakras. You know, even just what I'll say, focusing or meditating on any one of these is effective. And here you can see that there's a written symbol in it, and you know that symbol is a representation of the seed sound that goes along with it. So the symbol is not just visual, as I say, it's also represented in sound. You can find these natural symbols all over the place, both in human architecture and the architecture created by animals. And of course this area is pretty well developed in sacred geometry and in some cases aspects of feng shui. They connect with very, very deep information dynamics. You can see that, you know, symbols as the entanglement of meaning, memory, motion, and matter, it's just everywhere. There's so many layers of it. And right now, as a reminder, we're exploring natural symbols that develop straight out. They're self-created. In segment number 4, we're going to look at this thing called assigned symbols, where symbols are developed and then are fortified over time, and then they become potent over time. Natural symbols can be analyzed mathematically. We saw that shell, that seashell earlier, and here you see a little bit of a sine wave diagram, and You see, you can also stylize a symbol, abstract it in a certain way, and it still maintains the inherent qualities of consciousness, information, and energy. It's no coincidence that that this company has created Possibility Wave, and the recognition of what a possibility wave is, and then developing an icon or a logo, a symbol, is meaningful in ways that go far beyond just looking nice. Think about all the different natural symbols that you encounter in life, and what it is, and what it does, what its nature is. You can also find natural symbols in science and medicine, and it's more than just representational. It's a lot more than just representational. It is linked or entangled with meaning, and the memory of that. And memory goes beyond just being able to rethink a thought in your head. I mean memory in terms of adaptation and what we could call evolution. Meaning and memory and motion and matter, what seems to be manifesting in appearance. So when you see these things, and I'm looking on the screen right now, the molecules and different atoms and ways of representing it, these are natural symbols. They come, they're not, okay, they're slightly stylized, we can recognize that. Some are like the blue one looks like a blurry cloud thing. That's right out of a technically designed device. It's not somebody making an image like the one on the left. That thing looks kind of like a golf ball with things going around it. But the construct is directly, we could say, out of nature. It's not like weird things that don't exist. This exists. And these are symbolic representations, but not symbol in terms of divorced from the reality. They're entangled. You can't separate them. Okay, we're going to, I don't know whether it's tiptoe or jump into another area of symbols, natural symbols, that have been perplexing very bright minds forever. This very mysterious and provocative natural symbol that you find in mathematics, and we call it the number. A philosophical question here, whether numbers are real or whether it's symbolic. It remains unanswered. I say maybe the answer is both, that a number is a real symbol. Equally real and unreal, as my teacher Lama Tarchin had said about something similar. Let's have a look at numbers, because we use numbers an awful lot. What about numbers as natural symbols? Okay, some examples. Around 500 BC, quite famously, Pythagoras became interested in a lot of things in terms of numbers and math and ratios and forms, and he began studying the lengths of vibrating strings, but in terms of measurement, not just what they sounded like, but the sounds that got produced in relation to different ratios of length. And what he saw was that the numbers and their relationships, from a mathematical perspective, had very specific sounds as frequencies. So different frequencies relating to different ratios, relating to different lengths. Wow, the numbers as symbols were equivalent to the sounds. I'll repeat that. The numbers as symbols are equivalent to the sounds. One is not a product of the other. They're simply different ways of expressing the same fact. So here, the unification of all of this as a symbol took a big leap. This is another one. The whole business of binary numbers, and you get to numbers, you can't get more basic than just the binary system. There's a 0, there's a 1. That's it. That's it. Even working in all the fancy, statistical probability formulas, what you're doing is you're basically working with the zone between 0 and 1. That's it. And we all know that the zeros and ones make up computer codes. So what about this funny 0 and 1 business? It has a remarkable early history, we have to say. Famously, the Book of Changes, right, the I-Ching. 5,000 years ago or so, it seems to have emerged from Chinese culture, and it's completely built on the binary symbols. You arrange them in hexagrams, 3 and 3, but they're all combinations of 0 and 1, or you call it yin and yang, or even and odd, different ways of sort of expressing it, but it's binary. And the configurations of these binary relationships have a profound entanglement with meaning, memory, motion, and matter. Profound. It was used originally as a divination manual. It's a process, a type of divination called clarimancy. And clarimancy works with basically two things. One is, a number of things, but basically randomness and consciousness. We'll look a little bit more at what that means, but over time, the I Ching moved from this divination manual into a cosmological text, because the more and more these different aspects of change were studied and appreciated and observed, there developed a philosophical appreciation of each and every one of them. And this took place over a very long period of time. So these commentaries started to come out, and the commentaries were, and still are, profoundly insightful. Clarimancy, it's a form of divination using what's called sortition. That's the thing where you cast lots or bones or stones, or here you see an African image up top. What it's all about is a practitioner using sortition creates a circumstance where a set of factors that are just randomly associating with each other, with the addition of the faith field, will then come out of randomness in some kind of organized fashion. And in the context of the divination, and it has to have a context, the pattern of display generates meaning. And a lot of people think it's just baloney. I don't. It can be baloney because the practitioner can be baloney. And in some forms of sortition, it is baloney. They're playing a game, and maybe they're deluding the person involved, or they themselves are self-deluded. But there are real interpretations. There are realities in this, and the I Ching is structured in such a way that it introduces a great deal of structure and context for the practitioner to work with. The I Ching became, very, very ambitious, far more than just the simple binary process, because the 64 hexagrams, they evolved in a way that the claim is that they represent as archetypes all the situations of human life. That these are all the different ways that change can behave. And they believe that they can capture all of that in 64 different examples. You do the math on it, and it's provocative. So what this is all about is consciousness, faith field, and symbol. Okay, just to show you how this thing, this phenomena, the I Ching, really still to this day penetrates our life. You know, around the 1600s, the West was beginning to interact with the Orient in new ways, a lot through the Jesuits, actually, the early Catholic Church and the Order of the Jesuits. And information began to come back into the West, into Europe, about China, about Chinese culture. And one of the things that was dribbling back in was the I Ching. So here's this fellow, a brilliant person, responsible for a lot of what we call calculus, Gottfried Wilhelm von Leibniz. He was a Western philosopher and mathematician, and as a mathematician and philosopher, he was looking for a more pure and simplified arithmetic than the decimal system that was ruling the day at that time. And you know, he ended up with developing the binary system, but he also ended up with calculus. So you know, he's no lightweight. And what he discovered in the I Ching was his inspiration for binary arithmetic that has since matured into the heart of all of our computer technology. Wow. Here even you can see, this is a translation of course, but this is the title of his manuscript on binary arithmetic. He called it The Explanation of the Binary Arithmetic, which uses only the characters 1 and 0, with some remarks on its usefulness and on the light it throws on the ancient Chinese figures of Fuxi. Fuxi is purportedly the first author of the I Ching, so he didn't call it here the Classic of Change or the Book of Changes. He referred to the legendary first author, but this is the credit he gave in his creation. So here we're working with numbers as symbols of and not only numbers as a whole, but the most basic of numbers, the 0 and the 1, and how this 0-1 symbology has been affecting human civilization for millennia. A little bit more about this. We're getting close to an hour. This is a very big subject that's not gotten enough attention, although it's gathering more in some circles. It's the preposterously interesting fact that the construct of the I Ching and the construct of DNA are almost exactly the same. Now, you know, if you go back to the statement that the I Ching represents all possible aspects of change and is an archetype for the cosmological principles in human existence, you say, well, that's pretty heady. But then if you run the same math, if you run the same binary constructs, you end up with DNA, which is kind of freaky. I'm not going to go into the detail here because it's not so important, you know, but basically you've got these base pairs in DNA. The adenine, the thymine, guanine, and you know, the cytosine. But the A, T, G, C, that's really famous. And if you combine them as sets, what you end up with is you end up with the same 64 possibilities that you get from the I Ching hexagrams. Both serve a critical function. The DNA has the genetic material for living systems, and I Ching supposedly, on a parallel track, contains all the spiritual and psychological processes of change and transition in the states of the universe, including the human and the mind and the spirit. Now, think of the I Ching as the template for all possible dynamics and change. And they say there are 64 of them. And then you've got DNA with the 64 possible combinations. And you think, this is pretty heavyweight symbology here. There are only 4 combinations of yin and yang. There's called resting yin, moving yin, resting yang, moving yang. And as yin and yang, if you represent them as zeros and ones, you know, in binary theory, you only got 4 possible choices. 0, 0, 0, 1, 1, 0, 1, 1. These are the same 4 choices that align with the TCGA of DNA. So why am I including this example? Because I'm trying to find different examples outside of biofeedback where you can see the pure information process involved in the encoding of information. And something like the incredibly aligned similarity, if nothing else, you could say sameness, of the I Ching, which began as a divination manual and process, and DNA, which is totally emergent out of creation itself, as being locked in such a similar, if not the same way, it causes pause, I hope, if nothing else. So this is what I'm proposing as we're finishing up here, the rethinking of this binary bit of 0 and 1. First of all, let's call them real symbols, and let that be the merging of things. It's not a duality anymore. Let's rethink 0 and 1. How about if we say 0 represents not manifest, and 1 represents manifest? You could say 0 means I'm not here. I'm here, I exist, but I'm not here. And 1 is I am here. So in both cases, I am. It's just in one case, you are but not here, and the other one, you are here. 0 is I'm not here. 1 is I am here. Jumping into quantum physics, it's recognized that particles kind of flicker in and out of manifestation. They're labeled virtual and actual. So the virtual particles, they just seem to emerge just from pure emptiness. They mysteriously manifest and then disappear back into emptiness again. So I'm thinking the 0, I'm not here, is a virtual particle. And the 1 is the actual particle. And that our experience here is this flickering in and out of manifestation. Unmanifest, manifest, unmanifest, manifest. Maybe that's the profundity of the ultimate symbology of 0 and 1. A little bit further before we finish, this funny quantum binary, this thing called the qubit. In quantum physics, there's a new twist on the 0-1 binary bit concept. You have to remember that in the basic binary system, there are just 2 choices, right? There's 0, there's 1. You can not be here or you can be here. Well, what about this qubit? Basic binary offers 2 choices. You got 0, you got 1. Choose. The quantum qubit plays by different rules for choice. It can be 0, it can be 1, or it can be 0 and 1. Whoop, that's 3 choices. Oh, wait a minute. How can you have your cake and eat it too? How can you not be here and be here at the same time? In quantum physics, there is this thing called superposition. This is really important. Oh, it's so important, information coded biofeedback. And when we get into the chance to work with, for example, Adapt Wellness, that'll be the first information coded biofeedback program out of Possibility Wave, you'll see how important these principles are. Possible, probable, certain. Superposition is the zone of probabilities where there are multiple possibilities and they all exist at the same time. They all exist at the same time. If you look up at the diagram there, that's a little bit of a sort of a simplicity here, but you can see the big yellow waveform, the big like up and down. And in it, you see that there are two waveforms. So this is the zone of probability, but you can see there are two possibilities within that zone of probability. So this is how you can have 0 and 1 at the same time. Possibility wave view is certainly based on possible, probable, certain, and the probability phase of an event is filled with multiple processes that are shaping the event. Never jump to conclusions. Nothing is certain until it actually happens. Words can be either natural symbols or assigned symbols. Now we have to understand that the majority of words are assigned symbols, and I'm reminding you that segment number 4 is going to develop more extensively what is an assigned symbol. Right now this is all about natural symbols. Some words are natural symbols, however. You know, probably the easiest example is to explore various mantras. Mantras are spoken symbols, and they can be either composed of natural symbols, assigned symbols, or a combination of the two. If you have a mantra that is a pure natural symbol mantra, basically this is composed of what are called seed syllables. Seed syllables are when the human voice tries to reproduce certain vibrational tones that are experienced in the different states of consciousness. So in different deep states of consciousness, in one of the innumerable modulations of consciousness, different experience aspects will manifest to the practitioner as what you would call sound. You hear it, although you're not hearing it with your ears. You hear it. And sometimes, of course, there are visuals that accompany it and so on. So a seed syllable is when a practitioner attempts to use the vocal apparatus that we have to reproduce, to create a resonant sound that has the similarity so close that you could say it's the mantra tone, the spoken voice of that natural experience. It's a natural symbol. And here I mention, and everybody probably knows, the best well-known is Om. Om is not just making a sound with your mouth, it's attempting to create a vibration that is one and the same as the vibration that emerges in that state of consciousness. So natural symbols you can find in mantras. Okay, this is the end of segment number 3 in the part 4. Part 4 is focusing on information encoding of signals. I've said that the next segment, segment 4, is going to go right into more about symbols, but these are the assigned symbols. All of this is so critically important because these are the core components to recognize and clarify, to appreciate how it is that pure information processes can create information codes. And we've been going through a good deal of exploration of examples that are not in biofeedback. But once you recognize the pure information encoding process, then you can more easily recognize how it can be incorporated in biofeedback. Thanks very much for your time. It's about an hour and 10 minutes. See you next time. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.